Hello. There's number two. And finally, the intern. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode, a beautiful episode of This Uncanny Earth. Episode 280, Stellar Phenomena, playing off the eclipse we had here in Ohio on April 8th. Hope you guys are ready for this episode. I'm excited. I've been excited about this since you mentioned it the other day. I'm really grooving with this. I think it's a solid idea. I think you came up with a solid idea.
Yeah. I was brainstorming.
Yeah. And,
Storm that brain.
and if anybody out there has a topic they would like to see covered, by all means, leave that in the chat, and we will definitely cover it in an upcoming episode of This Uncanny Earth. Next week, we're going to be talking about gray aliens and abduction cases. Big fan of abduction cases. Big fan of gray aliens. So if you guys are fans of those two things, and if you're a real big fan of them combined, you're not going to want to miss the next episode of This Uncanny Earth. You're not going to want to miss this one. You're going to want to watch this one over another one that had to switch their schedule because they're trying to compete with us, but they can't compete with us because we're amazing, and they're not. They try though. They try. We'll give them the good old golf clap. Little 1, 2. How do you do? There we go. Little golf clap for them. There you go. You guys are doing good. So tonight we are talking about stellar phenomena. Before we get into that, as always, I am your illustrious host. Yes, I will always continue to use the word illustrious when I describe myself. Robert Solomon. Over to my, over here is my co-host, the one, the only Spider. And right below us, over in here, he's diagonal, kind of. He's kind of diagonal. We got our intern, Steven. Gentlemen, how are we doing for me and Spider on this cold Ohio night? And how are you doing on whatever night you are having there in beautiful Tennessee?
Good over here.
Now, are you guys, what are your temp? What was your temp today?
68 right now.
Oh, that is a gorgeous temperature, man. That's gorgeous. Mm-hmm. Today here it was like 50, 40, 50, one of those two. Not so. But yes, stellar phenomenon. So me and Spider, we actually got to see the eclipse in its totality. Spider was in McKinley Park. I was at my home watching it. Excuse me. Did you get to see the eclipse, Steven, or did you only see a partial?
None at all. It was hidden behind the clouds.
Oh.
I got to see it in 2017, though.
Now, did you guys get totality in 2017? We did not.
I think we did.
The next one's going to be in Europe in like 2026. So if we can make this happen, which I believe we could be in Europe for 2026.
I want a Cherry Breaks tour.
I was just about to say we got to contact Cherry Break to have her put us on the tour.
One of those Ireland and Scotland and UK tours.
Yes, that would be amazing. I would love to do all of that and then some. Gentlemen, how familiar are you with stellar events?
For me, I don't know much. I know like black holes are a thing. They kind of like, suck everything in with their gravity. And the gravity is so forceful that it even like takes light in, is my understanding.
Yes.
And I know, I might be using the wrong name. I think it's called a stellar array. The big thing they used to move planets. That sounds pretty cool. And I was going to talk about the telescope tonight. Okay. And I also heard that the lasers they use like for LASIK eye surgery are the same lasers they used on the space station to help them tell where to dock at. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Okay. How about yourself, Spider? What do you know?
Well, I've been a big fan of space things for quite a long time. We've had a lot of talks about space.
Many talks, man.
I've read a lot of articles about black holes and white holes and wormholes and all kinds of space holes. Yep. And this is a show for kids, so nobody making jokes. But
I'm perpetually 14 years old.
Leave the inappropriate jokes to NASA.
Yes,
but
I'm about that.
And their quest for coitus.
There you go.
I've always been real fascinated with that kind of stuff, and with historically how those kinds of things have been perceived by various civilizations throughout our history. Because sometimes we're just like, oh, that's pretty cool. There's a shooting star. Whereas in ages past, it's like, oh, it's doom. It's the destruction of everything.
Okay.
Like comets in particular. Comets are one of the things that I'm going to be talking about this evening.
Excellent, excellent. So myself, I am well versed in wormholes, black holes, white holes, comets, eclipses, solar flares, what are known as coronal mass injections or mass ejections, I should say. Very well versed in all of those things. Have been for a very long time. Enjoy space. One of these times we're gonna have to revisit because we have Steven the intern with us now. We're gonna have to revisit Dyson spheres. We're gonna have to revisit the stellar complex, the whole concept of moving whole universes via our sun, and we'll get Kardashev scale probably as well because that's, like I said, another thing I highly enjoy. So I will be going on about the intricacies of our eclipse as well as some coronal mass injection information and something that I know maybe my co-host here might know, I don't know if Steve might know, but the supposed missing day from Joshua 10. So we're going to be getting into that. First and foremost, though, if you guys haven't, please head on over now to youtube.com/@thisuncanny earth to subscribe. And also, if you haven't and you're on Facebook, head on over to Facebook at This Uncanny Earth and This Uncanny Media Network, bringing you the best in paranormal podcasting each week right here on This Uncanny Media Network. Now, let's jump right into this. Yes, sir. Do you have something to say?
No, I was confirming what you were saying. I was agreeing it with a boom. Boom.
You were dropping the heat, dropping
them bombs.
So before we get into all this, I know our listeners are out there like, well, what is a stellar phenomenon? And I want to hear more about it. Well, thank you, old man Jenkins. I would love to tell you more about such a thing. A stellar phenomenon is defined as a phenomena associated with stars in space. A very simple definition. However, the intricacies of these stellar events is not so simple. And some of these were very deeply engineering ridden, mathematical driven. So we're not going to do that to you. We're not going to throw the three-body problem at you just yet, but we are doing that for a future episode. Hope you guys are exactly and ready for that. So the first thing I want to talk about is on April 8th, 2024, a few weeks ago, here in the lovely state of Ohio, we witnessed a phenomenon known as a solar eclipse. We witnessed it in its totality, meaning we had 100% view of the moon moving in front of the sun. That's pretty amazing, guys. Pretty amazing. Now, this occurs when the moon, navigates itself in front of the sun. And on this April day, darkness happened for a few brief moments. Now, when I say darkness, I do not mean an all-encompassing darkness where you can't see your hand in front of your face. It seemed almost like a dusk. And I don't know about you, Spider, but you could actually hear the birds stop chirping. Mm-hmm. It was very eerie silence.
We have geese that are always around this time of year
honking around, buddy, honking around.
They're in McKinley Park, and they seemed kind of normal about it. Like everything else was kind of like, ooh, like kind of.
How were your animals?
I wasn't home, so don't know. But they didn't seem too bothered when I came home. It didn't seem like, because they have the lights inside the house and everything, and they're not too concerned about anything. They're cats and they don't care. But,
Cerebes, did you get? Don't mean to interrupt you. I'm curious here. Cerebes, did you get totality in Columbus? I don't know if he did or not. He might have. I know a big chunk of Ohio did, but I don't know if he got totality.
The coolness there was that he mentioned. That was noticeable too, because you felt it really get colder as it was really starting to get dark. Like the dark was a little bit more gradual, but the cold started setting in real quick, which just tells you how much we rely on that sun for our warmth in the warmer seasons.
Nice. Yeah, I got to see it in totality. It was cool. It was definitely a chillier vibe. It was so dark, though, that the neighbors' lights that usually come on at dusk came on. And then once that moved away, it was cool. Now, to most Americans, it was just pretty much a cool event that sold some sunglasses, t-shirts, and the occasional hot dog. To others, in this time period, it was an omen that weighed on different aspects of their beliefs. Still, it was a very peaceful event. There wasn't anything crazy that happened. No riots broke out. No people lost their mind. No battles were fought. No blood was shed. I'm sure there might have been some weird sacrifices because people do things that people do. But for the most part, it was a very peaceful event. To the ancients, however, Eclipses of both the lunar and solar variety are viewed different and were viewed different. Let's start with the eclipse and the exodus of the Anasazi people. The Anasazi people were actually the ancient Pueblo Indians, or the ancient ancestors of the Pueblo Indians. They dwelt in what is known as the Four Corners of the United States. Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico all meet at a point. And that point is called the Four Corners. One I think we are going to visit in the near future, because I think that it's time for this Uncanny Earth to head out west. We've been in the east, we need to head out west, and we need to see the desert. Now, they were also considered one of the earliest forms of cliff dwellers. Now, at first, they did not start out as cliff dwellers. They had normal civilizations on land, but then they realized that it was better for defense, and it was better to just, excuse me, it was better for cooling and everything else to live in the canyon. It gets hot out there in that desert. So they go into the cliffs. Now, many point to the weather patterns and droughts as the reason why the Anasazis left, which would make sense. I mean, that's a perfect example of wanting to leave. If you cannot produce food or you cannot gather food in your area, the best thing you could do is, in fact, move to another area, which, by all means and purposes, is a fantastic idea. Hello, James. Of course, Sarah B is talking that trash. He's done, he says. And Apple is here. Hello, Apple and Sarah B's. You guys are children. And our Stephen the intern is also a child. So this is great. We've hired children on the show. There's only going to be 2 children. And me and Spider are the 2 children. So you got to.
We're not concerned about child labor laws right here.
No, we are not. We will make you work those mines. All right. So we have this Native American people that leaves. They leave their cliff dwellings in and around a little after 1264. In 1257 and 1259, there are 2 solar eclipses in totality and a comet that happens in 1264. Now, a lot of your ancient Native Americans had beliefs that weigh deeply into what went on in space. So they see these things happening and think, well, this is probably not the best place to live. You're seeing these phenomena happen. The first one, you're probably scared. You're probably terrified. This has never happened in the lifetime. Your ancestors have never talked about this. Boom, now all of a sudden it happens. Oh, we have Sound Zeus here in the chat. He's letting us know what he thinks of us. What's up, Sound Zeus? Good evening.
The ever opinionated.
The ever opinionated. So this could have been a sign to the ancient Pueblo that it was time for a location change. And it is thought that the petroglyphs in the Chaco Canyon in New Mexico point to such solar eclipses. But researchers are cautious to use this as proof of evidence for solar eclipses, since many petroglyphs could actually just look like that. They could just be a drawing of the sun. So you got to be real careful when you're doing your research regarding an ancient people like the Anasazi and solar eclipse. So, and the astronomer that proposed this concept of them leaving via the eclipses rather than the droughts that they were having was astronomer Tyler Nordgren. So he is the one who proposed this concept that these 2 solar eclipses happen in 1257 and then again in 1259. Then the comet happens in 1264. And like Spider, he's going to discuss this here in a bit. Comets are a very funny thing. And people, a lot of the time, especially in our society, for anybody that remembers Marshall Applewhite, who took his cult followers to heaven, so to speak, on the end of a comet after they drank poison in the early 90s, or the late 90s, I believe it was. Late 90s, early 2000s. I don't remember. It was a different time. So that's just one incident, and that's an ancient people seeing this and being afraid. I would be terrified. I'd be like, whoa, wait a minute. And there's different civilizations, like the Chinese, The ancient Chinese believed that it was a dragon swallowing the sun. So they beat the drums to chase it away, yelling, screaming. Some cultures shot arrows at the sun. Some cultures to this day shot at the sun. I believe it was Cambodia or Laos. They shot at the sun. And people died because of bullets go up. They got to come back down because gravity. So the eclipse ideology still stands strong. But where the eclipse, in my personal opinion, is the most fascinating are two battles. One in 585 BC and the second one in 413 BC. Let's go ahead and jump into the Battle of the Eclipse of 585 BC. Now, there's a battle occurring between the Lydians and the Medians and Anatolia, which would be present-day Turkey. This is on the border of the Halys River. The Lydian captain Alyattes and his army are fighting an indecisive battle against the commander of the Median army, Cyaxares. The historian Herodotus points out the outcome of this battle in an interesting fashion. Now, among their battles, there was one night engagement. As, however, the balance had not inclined in favor of either nation, another combat took place in the 6th year, in the course of which, just as the battle was growing warm, day was on a sudden changed into night. The event had been foretold by Thales, and the Medes and the Lydians, when they observed the change, had ceased fighting and were alike anxious to have terms of peace agreed upon. Now, one thing I want to say, the reason the Lydians and the Medes had an issue was because a son of one of the rulers was killed by some hunters. The Lydians decided to take the hunters in and protect them from the Medians. And so they said, okay, we're going to go to war. You're protecting somebody that took somebody from us. We're taking into war. And so this war is a 1-2. It's we're fighting, we're winning. No, we're fighting, we're winning. And it's just a battle after battle after battle. But after this eclipse, they are so incessant on peace that Alyattes' daughter, Irenaeus, marries Cyaxares' son, Astyages. And the Halys River, which is now the Kızılırmak River in Turkey, becomes their border. So they put their border on the place that they saw the eclipse, which, if they knew what an eclipse really was, that battle would have probably still been waging. Maybe to this day. We don't know. History is a fickle mistress. But what I find to be fascinating is as soon as they saw it, they said, okay, this is a sign of the gods that we should not be fighting. Because what we have to understand is, in the BC time periods, wars were just an everyday thing because you're trying to survive. But now you have a situation or a civilization over here that's also trying to survive, and you're both vying for resources because you can't just mine resources easily like we do today. They didn't have power plants. They didn't have grocery stores. So you're killing what needs to be killed. You're mining what needs to be mined. You need your resources because they are the life and death of your people. Now, gentlemen, I want to ask you some questions because I did not do it on the first one. What are your thoughts on the concept of the ancient Native American people, the Anasazi? This will be a two-part question. What are your thoughts on the eclipse mentality of the Anasazi? And two, do you in fact believe that it was because of that eclipse, the two eclipses, eclipses, I don't know, eclipses and that comet, the reason they left? Or do you think it was the droughts that caused them to leave? And we'll go ahead and go with Steven the intern. What are your thoughts, my friend?
So as far as them just getting scared and freaking out because of the eclipses, that I think it's understandable because looking back at it, they didn't understand the eclipse like we understand it now. We understand it a lot better in these, modern times, like scientifically, like it happens because of this or that or whatever. Yes. But back then they didn't understand it. And I mean, they were highly religious back then. And, I feel like it would have been very easy for them to think, oh no, God is punishing us for some reason, or a dragon, like you said, some cultures believed it was a dragon eating the sun or something. And
Yes.
when they see a dark shadow pass in front of the sun and they don't understand the science behind it, obviously, yeah, they're going to get a little scared. They might get freaked out. And I don't know if they left because of that, but when you mentioned droughts, that seems like it would be a good reason to leave, because if you can't grow food, you can't survive in that land or that area.
Yeah, no, I agree.
A lot of these events are really heavily interconnected, because when you look at how ancient societies interpreted various events, they would see not only the eclipse itself, but they might see the drought as punishment for something, and they might see one as leading to the other, or vice versa. So
Right.
while they might have left ultimately
Yeah.
because of the drought might have been because of the eclipse in their minds.
I could see that.
The Aztecs, and before them the Inca and the Mayans, like most of the native populations in the Americas, had a distinct history of omens around eclipses. It was pretty well entrenched by the time the Ansazi came around and left. It was a pretty deeply held belief. The Aztecs actually believed that if an eclipse happened at a certain point of the year, on a very specific day in a very specific month, if an eclipse ever happened on that day, then that would be the end of the world. And so they would, when that day rolled around, to make sure an eclipse didn't happen, they would increase sacrifices and do various
Yeah.
things to make sure that it didn't happen. But that didn't stop parts of their society from abandoning cities and towns, along with the Incans and the Mayans.
Now
There's
I'm
evidence of
gonna
all of them.
I'm gonna stop you there. The Mayans actually knew how eclipse worked. They
Mm.
understood the concept of an eclipse. They figured it out, so to speak, which wouldn't be too hard because your timing
Mhm.
of your sun staying in that spot it's going to seem like eternity when you're there, but you're going to think, oh my goodness, okay, that was it. And I think they grasp that. Now, obviously, I'm not a Mayan. I can't, 100% say sure, but I want to say and go on record here that I think the Anasazi left because of the drought. I don't think it was because of the eclipse. I think the eclipse might have spooked them, but I don't think that it was because of that. Because here's the thing: you are in a if you're a BC era civilization, your primary goal is defense. You want to live in a place that has resources and a place you can fight if you have to, that's well fortified, you know. But if you don't have the food and you don't have the resources to gather, well, time to up and leave. I don't see those people leaving a place that is well guarded, that's easily defendable. Because I don't know if you gentlemen have ever seen pictures of these cliff dwellings. They're insane. They have ladders that went up into their homes that you're climbing every day. Now, I'm only going to speak for myself. I'm going to sleep at the bottom of that ladder some days because I'm going to be paying, what if you forget something? You had to go up and down the ladder. Now, they were very much better in shape than the rest of us because they didn't have a sedentary lifestyle. They had to constantly be hunting. They had to constantly be gathering resources, food, medicine, everything else. So to me, I don't buy into the eclipse narrative in this situation. I do think that it was because of the drought, because it does. Other historians have talked about a sort of climate change rolling through, weather patterns changing, which they do. We see it here in Ohio, weather patterns changing and thus shifting. So if a place shifts and you're not getting the amount of water you used to, you're not getting the amount of crops you're used to, you're going to move to a place where you're going to find better crops, or you're going to migrate into societies.
The other thing about that too is when you talk about
Same.
when you talk about the Mayans,
Yes, sir.
the Mayans were the most advanced of those three major.
Yes.
They were the most intelligent. The societies that came after, the Incans were still pretty good,
Yeah.
But they were kind of slipping a little bit. And the Aztecs had lost a lot of the more cerebral thought patterns in those kind of things and
We
had
have to
settled onto
remember
the human sacrifice aspect for most of
that,
everything.
and that is right there. They were
Mhm.
more of a violent driven society, the stronger of the societies, or the stronger man gets to do the strongest things. Might makes right type of ideologies. So their sacrifices, like you said, and you brought up a good point, to keep the sun from going into an eclipse, the consistent sacrifice had to keep in rotation. And the mentality there is off, because you have to really be off to just pull the heart out, take a bite, life force. There's a whole process behind this.
Kalima.
There it is, Indiana Jones. There it is. The Mayans were intelligent for a species, or a human species in that region, which is wonderful, because I've studied the Mayans, the Incans, the Aztecs, and I love studying the Mayans because they made the calendar that everybody thought the world was going to end in 2012. It didn't. I was at work when everybody thought the rapture was going to happen.
That was the beginning of the apocalypse. The world is going to end every day ever since.
I mean, maybe.
Yep.
I don't know. But okay, so let's get into our next question here. Gentlemen, the Battle of the Eclipse in 585 BC. Your soldier on a battlefield in the ancient Grecian world, and you're fighting your enemies. You're like, man, I'm gonna give it to them. And you look up, and you see this event happening. It is coming before your eyes. What do you do?
I think I would just freeze. Very confused. Be like, oh, what's going on?
What would you do, Spider? Spider'd be like, I'd stab the guy next to me.
Well, see, because if we're taking our modern
that would be the smart
thought
thing
patterns,
to do.
or if we're because I'm sometimes pretty unsophisticated already.
Sometimes.
Roughly 60-40. But
70-30, and that's me being nice.
But yeah, if it was me, I would almost think, okay, I'm going to take advantage of things here. But at the same time, you look around, nobody else is doing anything. They're all kind of like, and you get into that kind of herd mentality that like this is some kind of an event that's going on that everybody's kind of worried about. Okay, maybe I'll just step back and wait and see what happens.
So there's two parts to me. The first part, go after the commander and kill him. That's the way you destabilize a whole military unit.
Assassin's Creed taught you a lot.
The real part of me is probably dip. Like, I didn't see my brothers die in battle. People aren't coming home. Everybody's looking. I'm gone. I'm dipping out. I'm not dying for whatever cause that you have. That's not what's hip. But I think, like Spider said, you're in herd mentality. And me personally, I would be looking at it. I'd be like, wow, this is the crit, because that's what I did when it happened here. Like, I just stared at it like, this is the coolest. And I will go on record as that's the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. I've never seen something that amazing, maybe save for like personal relationships. I've never seen anything that amazing in my life. Like, that is on such a level above me as a human being. Like, the finite of life. I saw that in the eclipse, not to get all like, but like, you realize that you are in a place to see something that not many people have ever seen in their entire lives. And I remember asking my neighbor, I go, hey, what would you be doing right now if this was like 2000 BC? What do you think people thought in 2000 BC? And she goes, I'd probably go crazy. She literally said, I'd probably go crazy.
Omens and all that kind of thing, it was a very important part of life at the time, regardless of what particular religion you were in at the time. People put a lot of great stock into signs and portents.
Yes, people still do. And there were still some people that had some different, I'll say, different opinions. But it doesn't. I don't think it makes it any less special. I think it makes it even more interesting, to be perfectly honest. So, we've all decided. Now, there's one more battle that I want to talk about, and that's the eclipse of 413 BC and the beginning of the end of the Athenians. So on August 27th, 413 BC. Now, I got a question for you guys. When was the Gregorian calendar invented? Does anybody know this?
I don't know. I can look it up, though.
Please look it up, because they have put months to these, because the other one was May, like, something. I didn't include it in the last one. This one, I was kind of like, all right, I'll put it in. But they didn't have
1582.
They didn't have August and May in ancient Greece, did they?
It says October 1582, following the papal bull Inter Gravissimus, issued by Pope Gregory the 13th.
Which is AD. So, yes.
Yeah.
So, in 413 BC, Athens and Sparta are locked in a vicious decades-long fight. Athens and Sparta have been going head to head to head. The Athenian League Part 1 is set up, but Sparta's becoming a pain in their neck. And they have become such a monster by this point, they have brought in the Sicilian state of Syracuse. The Athenian commander Nicias orders a temporary retreat. Writer and philosopher Plutarch tells us that Nicias himself plans to sail home, but a lunar eclipse takes place. Nicias is a very superstitious human being. Nicias looks at this and says, oh my God, that's an omen. We should not leave. He makes his men stay, and the boat stays in the harbor. Nicias himself postpones it. He says, we're not leaving, we're not going nowhere. This is the advantage the Syracusans need at that point. They overrun the Athenians, and the Athenians, needing their grip on the Mediterranean, watch it slowly leave the grasp of their fingertips. Remember, the Athenians relied on their navy. This was a very naval-driven society, civilization. He's right. They need these regions for resources to strengthen their empire. They don't have the Mediterranean anymore. Their empire is slowly destroying itself. It's a catastrophic defeat, and it spells the beginning of the end of the Athenian state. Nicias was left in charge of this siege after his commanders died. They all get captured. Nicias is executed in the very same year his lunar eclipse predicts his end. His omen was his undoing. Gentlemen, you are one of the soldiers. Nicias has made this great command of all of you. He says, we're not going anywhere. What do you guys do? What do you think is the right course of action? Do you listen to your commander? You're a soldier in his army. You've signed up for this. You think he's wise, but some of you know he's superstitious. What do the two of you do?
Honestly, I'm not sure, because I've never really been in any situation like that.
Your boss gives you a command
that you know is wrong.
Maybe not so much that you know is wrong, but you know that he's mentally kind of, I don't want to say unstable, but a bit unfit for the position. He's good.
Paranoid.
He's a bit unfit. What do you do?
I think it depends on how well I know the boss personally. Okay. But in this particular situation, if it's like a matter of life or death, I think I would probably take my chances at getting exiled and try to run away and hide.
Okay.
It's a fair guess that there could have been a pretty large contingent in the soldiers themselves that probably thought, oh, you know what? He might be right. because we know the omens, we know this, the priests and whoever, they tell us we got to watch out for this stuff because this is when the gods are speaking to us and whatnot. So he might be right, and it's only afterwards when you're getting overwhelmed by enemy forces who are like, oh, we don't care about that. It's darker now. You can't see us. We're going to come in and we're going to push you off. Then you start thinking, you know what? Maybe I made a mistake.
And a mentally destabilized unit makes a breaking unit. Mm-hmm. Me personally, I probably would have thought the same. I'd have said, you know what? We've been worshiping these gods for so long. Our commander steered us right this far. Let's listen to him and see what happens. I think I would have been that soldier. We're soldiers. We're going to keep fighting, but not seeing anything like this your entire life. And then all of a sudden seeing that in the sky. You don't know how this works. You're not a philosopher. You're not anyone of higher intelligence. You're a soldier. You're basic cannon fodder for whatever your emperor or your commander wants you to do. Very excellent responses. And finally, the last thing that I have, and this is well, not the last thing, but this is something I want to put out there. Joshua and the longest day. Now, in the biblical Old Testament of Joshua, starting at 10:12, it states the following, and I want you gentlemen to understand this because it's very fascinating to me. It was then that Joshua spoke to Yahweh on that day. Yahweh routed the Amorite before the sons of Israel. Now, the Amorites are linked to giants, so that's something to keep in mind. And he said before the eyes of Israel, sun, stand still over Gibeon and moon over the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still and the moon, it stayed until the nation had avenged itself on its enemies. Is it not written in the scroll of the upright, which we will get to? The sun stayed in mid-heaven and did not rush to set for about one robust day. There has never been a day like this before or since, when Yahweh hearkened to the voice of a man, for Yahweh was fighting for Israel. This comes from Joshua 10, verses 12 through 14. What this tells us here is that Yahweh made the sun stop in the middle of the sky so Israel could rout and then destroy their enemies. Because we have to understand, if we're reading the Old Testament, Israel is trying to survive. The Old Testament is a survival manual. This is why they didn't eat shellfish, because they don't know how to cook it properly. And if you eat shellfish and not cook properly, you could 100% die. You can die from this. So the only way to destroy an enemy that you have is to obliterate them completely. You let none of them live, because if they live, then they come back and then they start killing your people. And revenge makes a mean regret machine, as it were. So the sun stops. Now, it's also mentioned in the scroll of the upright. And I had to look for the scroll of the upright. I was like, what is the scroll of the upright? So I'm Googling it one day. Turns out it's the book of Jasher, which is a legit book. And it states the following. And when they were smiting, the day was declining toward the evening. And Joshua said in the sight of all people, sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and the moon in the valley of Ajalon, until the nation has revenged itself upon its enemies. And the Lord hearkened to the voice of Joshua, and the sun stood still, and hastened not to go down a whole day. And it stood still 36 moments. And there was no day like that before or after, because the Lord hearkened to the voice of a man. The only time in the Testament that he hearkens to the voice of a man. He does not hearken, meaning that a man asked, the man called God to do something and God did it. So we have to understand there's two sources for this. And the book of Jasher was never admitted into what would be canonically known today as the Holy Scriptures, both Old and New Testament. The book of Jasher is not there, and I do not believe it is in the Catholic Apocrypha either. Why would they leave that out? Maybe it's true. Hiding something. You break the books apart, the knowledge is separated. You got to piece them all together. And this comes from the book of Jasher 88, verses 63 through 65. Gentlemen, what I propose to you today is this. The Elohim, Yahweh himself, at the behest of a mortal man. Remember, we're flesh and bone. Whether you believe or not, that's fine. This event happens. What do you think scientifically could have caused the sun to stay in a position for an entire day? I'm talking a cycle. I'm not talking you wake up at 7, the sun's out. At 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, the sun sets. We are talking a full day. Gentlemen, what in science could explain this?
My first thought is some sort of weird magnetic polarity with the Earth that happened, but we weren't able to properly detect it or graph it. But I don't have any idea how that would have happened. But that's my thought, is because my understanding is I think the Earth's, like, everything that rotates around the Earth rotates at the speed it does because of the magnetic polarity and the force of gravity. Is that right?
I'm waiting for Spider on this one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, potentially. Gravity and the density of the planet and everything is basically what keeps us spinning in the folds of space, particularly.
So that's really all I could think of.
If I had to put forth a completely just potential and difficult to prove hypothesis, I would say a wobble, which we know happens.
It did. It happened with the tsunamis.
We would need to have some other kind of, you'd have to know if there's something else that happened on the planet. And that's a good point from James, in that another part of the world was a long night. So you have some evidence that one part of the world stayed on the sun for a preternaturally long time, whereas another part stayed in the dark. And if the planet wobbled, in my mind as I'm thinking this, it could wobble in a way where it could still spin normally, but keep the view of the sun in a relatively similar position. I don't think it would be the exact position, but from a person on the ground looking up, it doesn't look like it's approaching each of the horizons. It looks like it's staying put. So a combination of the wobble, possibly even maybe the moon passed at a certain point where it yanked the planet just a smidge, because the moon was closer to the Earth in ancient days, not so close that we were in danger of it smacking into us, but the moon has been slowly kind of drifting out a little bit more, and eventually, over some hundreds of thousands of possibly millions of years, the moon is going to be flung clear of Earth. So it would make sense that if it was closer, it would exert more influence, and perhaps some strange confluence of events pulled the planet into a wobble where it just looked like the sun was going to stay in the same spot, and it lasted a lot longer before it was able to set.
You see Steven, he's trying to hold the moon. I see it. I respect it. If I had to guess, I would say it was more a gravitational anomaly on the sun's part. For a brief window, whatever was going on, a black hole maybe close by, something that allowed the sun to move in a specific fashion where its light could shine on the earth for a specific set amount of time. Now, we also could go to the concept that maybe mankind didn't understand time. Maybe they thought that it was a full day, but it wasn't. It was just a longer day. I'm not saying either of those are right or wrong. These are scientific hypotheses I'm just pushing forth. Because personally, I believe it. I believe that the sun was held, that God held the sun. But that's personal beliefs, and nobody has to agree with them. That's just personally what I believe. To me, yes, I believe there was a being that held the sun in place so that these wicked nations could be wiped from the map. Because we have instances of nations like the Canaanites being wiped because of the sacrificial aspects to bull deities and them being completely murked because of the wickedness that they had done. So I think at certain times in our society, judgments are passed. And they have to be because it would upend a civilization or it upends mankind. I know a lot of people are going to take this and be like, that guy's crazy. He wants probably one of those $1 million jets to fly around the earth with.
I mean, who wouldn't?
No, I'll just take a cool like jet, like a cool like little jet that I can pilot.
Yeah.
That'd be fun. So if you want to donate me like one of them cool little jets that I can take, like me, Steven, like the whole like all my people and Craig, and we just be kicking it in the air, yes, that'd be fun. Like I'm gonna pilot for a bit, then let Craig pilot for a bit. We broke it. We broke immersion. We broke it.
I don't know who that is.
We got to restart the show.
I don't know who that is.
So
I think
it's
that's
interesting.
his neighbor down the street, isn't it?
It is. Greg is his name.
Yeah. You misspoke.
I did. I'm sorry. I apologize. But that are my thoughts on these. Now, gentlemen, we don't have a lot of time, and I'm sorry that I've taken up a lot of this time. I was very fascinated with this topic, and I really wanted to go whole into it. So, gentlemen, what do you have? I would like to actually start with Spider because I want to hear about some of these comets he was talking about.
Well, comets are another interesting thing that we're seeing as signs from above in the ancient times. And what's really fascinating about this is the reason is because you couldn't really track for a long time. You couldn't track the regularity of comets at first. Eclipses, they're on a pretty regular schedule most of the time, with the exception of like the longest day and the longest night. But we didn't start really writing down about our observations of comets until the 3rd millennium BC, which is much later than we've been noticing other things in the sky. And the reason that they were seen in a negative light was because they were said to disturb the harmony that you saw when you saw the night sky. It would suddenly be something that didn't belong there, passing through that space and then disappearing. You didn't know where it went. You didn't know like if it was going to land, if it was going to keep flying off. Aristotle believed that they were emanations from the Earth's atmosphere, until later observations said no, they don't come from the planet itself. When the Middle Ages rolled around, we'd collectively gotten less educated as a species. And so that was the high point of where they had the most negative views. They believed that they brought fever, illness, pestilence, death, difficult times, shortages, and times of great famine. Which was a lot of coincidence because comets have a pretty wide orbit when they pass through, and some comets don't even orbit at all. Some of them just pass through the system and then shoot right out back into deep space. There's been plenty of comets over the centuries that have come through, and then we've never seen them again, and we never will. Two of the comets, we've talked about one, and we're going to talk about it again real quick here. But two of the most famous comets that we know of in the modern day are Halley's Comet, which the last time was visible in at least this part of the world was in 1985 into 1986. And it's not set to come back around until 2061, which may be within our lifetime. We're going to be pretty decrepit by that point.
We'll be up
speaking
there.
For myself.
We'll be like this Uncanny.
But
we
might still manage to see it. But I was a kid when it rolled around the first time, and I have the most barest memories of them talking about it on the news at the time of Halley's Comet, how it was a big event. And then we talked about it in school many times after that as I grew up.
Did you see it? I don't remember seeing it.
I don't think so. If I did, I was too young. I was too young to just sit still probably and be like, oh, yeah, let's watch the comet.
Yeah, because I'm a kid. I'm like, what? But I will say this. I did see a total lunar eclipse when I was young. My dad, because you know my dad, put a ladder to the house that we were living at, and we climbed the ladder to the roof. And my dad took us on the roof, and we watched the lunar eclipse happen on the roof. It was cool. Like, I remember being like, this is cool. I'm a kid, but yeah, it was cool. Sorry.
Before that, Halley's Comet appeared in 1910, and this is the basically the 20th century, right?
Yeah.
But people were still, it was still early on. People believed that they would be poisoned by prussic acid, which was a material that apparently made up part of the comet's tail. It's some kind of acidic part of the stardust or whatever. And so people who may or may not have actually believed that made a living selling comet pills.
Man, I was born in the era.
Now, the Hale-Bopp comet, which is a slightly shorter, I believe, orbit, is a bit more famous for us because of, again, in 1997, when the 39 members of Heaven's Gate thought that in the tail of the comet there was an alien spacecraft, and they were communicating with it, and the only way to leave with it was to kill themselves. And so they did that, unfortunately, and flew off with it. So we've had a...
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Was that forced?
I believe a lot of them were into that.
Well, yeah, because like a lot of them were like brainwashed to do it. They were like, we wouldn't do it. But was it
I don't believe it was
massacre force?
I don't think it was at gunpoint. Okay. I think they went in and they found like they found them like with sheets on their head on bunk beds and things like that. And
have you ever seen the pictures? I saw a documentary about it, and the pictures are wild.
Yeah, it's pretty horrific, to be honest.
It's sad, really. It's sad. Because a lot of those people were like disenfranchised type of folks.
Yeah.
They had given up on life, and they found an outlet that accepted them for who they were. I'll put the documentary in the group so you guys can watch it, because I remember watching it, and like you got to see the videos of the people before they died, like having fun at the compound, hanging out with Marshall Applewhite, and he had the eyes. These cult leaders have these eyes. Yeah, it freaks me out. And I'm an adult man. And I'm like, bruh, come on.
There are people in politics right now that have eyes just like that. And you can tell. He's like, them's the eyes.
It's because they're serpents. Yeah, I gotta think coolly. I'm
choking on a pretzel. But yeah, we have a pretty complicated history with comets as well. I think even with there was a comet with the latest eclipse. There was a comet that passed through. We didn't see it. I don't think anybody here would have been able to see it. You had to have a pretty high-powered telescope and to see around the eclipse itself. But it even had a name, like an omen's name.
Like
it was the Devil's Comet because of the way that as it passed through, it looked like it had the crescent horns.
Yeah.
And I didn't do enough research on it to see if it was connected to actual, like, oh, the Devil's Comet. There's legends about it. I haven't been able to look that up. I meant to, and I didn't get to it. But the other two are a bit more famous, the Hale-Bopp and the Halley's Comet. So it's just interesting. There were people who believed that the Devil's Comet coming through on this eclipse was no coincidence, and that things happened. Who knows? I haven't seen any extra evidence of it so far. But yeah, we have a pretty complicated history with them as well, going back throughout the ages.
So what is the time between Halley's Comet's what, like 75?
Give or take, because it was 19. I calculated it earlier, but I didn't write down what it was. Let me pull it up again, because it's going to come back in 2061. and it last came back in 1986, 75 years.
Has anybody here seen a comet? I don't think I have.
Not me.
I don't think I've ever seen one.
I recall, like,
because I've seen shooting stars; those are fire. I've seen shooting stars,
literally.
but I don't think I've ever seen a comet.
They're literally fire.
Not a comment.
I think I saw the Hale-Bopp comet. I don't remember the circumstances either, as part of like
he was in Heaven's Gate.
But I mean, because it came close enough to see. It was in 1997, so I was an older kid. I was aware, it was actually a few years. I was probably a teenager, to be honest. It was a few years before graduating. So, I remember there being a big deal about it. I don't have any memories of actually seeing it, though, so I can't necessarily say that 100% factual. But I feel like I have seen one somewhere in my past, and just it hasn't stayed in my memory.
Okay. Steven, what do you got? We got like 4 minutes. Sorry, buddy. Yep. We didn't mean to.
Nah, you're good. So I had telescopes was going to be my main thing, and it was actually initially patented in 1608 in the Netherlands by a spectacle maker in Middelburg called Hans Lippershey. But even though that's when it was initially created or patented, it was initially made for like military war technology. And then later on, it was repurposed by Galileo, who was like, I wonder what would happen if I just look up into the sky with this. And from there on, that's how we invented more of the modern day telescopes with radio signals and infrared telescopes and everything else. And I was looking on here a minute ago, and apparently another thing I wanted to point out was the Kepler Space Telescope has actually discovered thousands of exoplanets. So it's pretty impressive to look at it and think how far we've come from something that was made for like glasses, like spectacles, and, wartime to see the enemy at a distance. And now we use it to see other planets. Like, I think that's pretty impressive.
I have to agree with you. I want to get one. I'd like to get a cool little telescope, because I would be out there watching. Because I'm very amazed at space. I like to go outside in the summertime when there's just stars in the sky and look up and see if I see a UFO.
And James Boggs said he retired in 98 from the Army.
98 was 98 was when I graduated, so that's fun. But the International Space Station passed over my house.
Oh, nice.
And you could see it because it was a clear night. You could actually see it in the sky. It was cool.
Oh, it was really cool. I heard they use lasers to actually tell the space stations where to dock at.
Yeah.
The same lasers they use in LASIK eye surgery. Like, it's impressive when you start looking at all the different like space technology that we use in our modern day lives. Oh, and one more thing in the last minute, if you don't stop me, I'm going to tell everyone how in space, because of the zero gravity, if you vomit, it's just going to float around because zero gravity, and it's a real big mess to clean up.
Well, that's exactly how we wanted to end the show.
Yes.
You just fell right into our trap.
There are legitimate studies being done on the space station of how to make foods in zero gravity, which foods are best, which ones aren't. Yes. There's a lot of really legitimate science going on about that. So that's actually, it's something that they want to know.
And what vegetables to grow as well. What vegetables?
And there's a few tests that we can't mention because this is a family show.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about that. Behave.
I am.
So, gentlemen, I want to thank you both for being here tonight. I had an absolute blast. This was an amazing show. If you're watching this post haste, thank you. If you're watching this in post, thank you. If you're watching this in the future, when the eclipses and comets have taken over the world and they're your rulers, thank you. Next week, we'll be talking about gray aliens and abduction cases. Of course, we'll be talking about regression hypnotherapy, which I'm very interested in. I'm very interested in the mental science that involves. So hope you guys enjoyed the show. Thank you, James Buggs. You, sir, are awesome. Thank you to Apple. Thank you to Sarah Beast. Thank you to AJ Deem. Thank you to Deadpool Head, who's basically Steven. Thank you to, there was another one, Sound Zeus. Thanks to all of you for being here. We appreciate you. The show's just going to keep getting better and better. So please stick around. And as always, why be boring when you could be uncanny? We will see you folks next week. Hey, spooky ghosts. I can't turn the show off.